I bought a new house in the mountains to finally be alone with nature. No noise, no people, just the wind in the treetops. Then my son-in-law called and said, "My parents are moving in with you. If you don't like it, move back to the city." I didn't say a word, but I left them a surprise that would turn their lives upside down. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories reach. I spent 42 years working as a head nurse at a hospital in New York City. 42 years of double shifts, missed holidays, and sacrificed weekends. Every cent saved fueled a single dream, an isolated cabin deep in the Rocky Mountains, where silence would be my only company. When I finally signed the deed to that small piece of land, at 65 years old, I felt as though a 40-decade weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The property was modest. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around the entire structure. But to me, it was a palace. "Congratulations, Miss Helen," said Matthew, the realtor, handing me the keys. "You are now officially the owner of 5 acres of peace and quiet." The keys felt heavy in my hand, laden with promise. I drove to my new home that same afternoon, following increasingly narrow roads until the asphalt gave way to dirt. The cell phone signal gradually faded. First 4 bars, then 3, 2, 1, until it disappeared completely. Perfect. The cabin appeared after a bend, exactly as in the photos, but infinitely more beautiful in person. Red shingle roof, stone walls, a sturdy chimney, and nothing but intense green all around. I parked the car, put my hands on the steering wheel, and took a deep breath, letting the tears flow freely. I was home, at last. The first few weeks were pure bliss. I woke up with the sunrise. I drank coffee on the porch, watching colourful jays and hummingbirds. I walked the property, recognizing every tree, every bush. At night, I sat by the fireplace with a book and a glass of wine, while the silence of the forest rocked me to sleep. It was exactly as I had dreamed, until the phone call came. I had to drive 5 miles to the only spot where the cell phone caught a signal, because the device had rung while I was in the nearest town buying groceries. It was Marilyn, my only daughter. "Mum, I'm glad you answered. We have a serious problem here." Something in her voice made me grip the phone tighter. "What happened, sweetie?" "Robert's parents lost their house. Bank trouble. Something about missed mortgage payments. They're going to stay with you for a few months." The shock left me momentarily speechless. Robert had been my son-in-law for 15 years, a man who always treated me with polite distance. His parents, Stanley and Eleanor, were practically strangers to me. "Marilyn, I bought this house to be alone. It's tiny, it only has 2 bedrooms." "Mum, they have nowhere to go. They are your grandchildren's grandparents." "But Robert is already organizing their move. They will arrive next week." I tried to argue, to explain that the house wasn't structurally suited, that the isolation wasn't good for older people with health issues, that I had saved for decades to have this space all to myself. But every objection was met with accusations of selfishness. "Honestly, Mum, I never imagined you could be so insensitive. They are Robert's parents. They would lose their dignity going to a nursing home." The call ended abruptly, leaving me stunned. I returned to my cabin feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. They hadn't even asked if I agreed. It was an imposition, not a request. I couldn't sleep that night. I walked around the house, touching the walls, looking at the few pieces of furniture I had bought so carefully. Each piece had been chosen to complement my dream of peace and simplicity. And now, Without my permission, strangers would occupy this space. The next day, I received another call, this time from Robert himself. Helen, just to confirm, my parents will arrive on Friday. I'll send their things tomorrow. His voice was cold, as if he were speaking to an employee, not his wife's mother. Robert, wait. We need to talk about this. I don't have the proper setup for— Look, Helen, he interrupted me. If you don't like the idea, you can go back to New York City. The apartment you sold still hasn't found a buyer. Those words revealed everything. It wasn't a temporary situation. They wanted my house, my dream, my sanctuary, and they expected me to just give it up. When I hung up the phone, something had shifted inside me. The patient, conciliatory nurse I had always been gave way to a woman willing to fight for what was rightfully hers. I wouldn't abandon my dream without a struggle. I took a notebook and started taking notes. I wouldn't act on impulse or emotion. I would plan every step with the same care and precision I had devoted to my patients for 4 decades. If they wanted a war, they were challenging the wrong strategist. First, I needed to understand exactly what was happening. Why would Robert's parents, who always seemed financially stable, suddenly lose their house? Why was my daughter, who always respected my independence, now pressuring me so intensely? There was more to this story than they were telling me. I drove to the nearest town, Flagstaff, Arizona, and settled into a small coffee shop with Wi-Fi. From there, I made some calls and did some investigating. Speaking with my former neighbor in New York City, I discovered something revealing. Helen, didn't you know? Robert lost his job 6 months ago. They sold one of the cars and have been behind on the condo payments. Marilyn is teaching extra classes to make up for it. This information changed everything. It wasn't just Robert's parents who were in trouble. It was the whole family. My cabin wasn't being requested out of necessity for my in-laws, but likely as an asset that could be sold or used as collateral for loans. Next, I called my former colleague, Paul, now an attorney specializing in real estate law. Helen, legally speaking, no one can force you to host people on your property, he explained. But family is complicated. Do you have all the deeds in order? I have everything, Paul. I saved for decades to buy this house. Then I suggest 2 things. First, document any communication about this matter. Second, do not leave the property under any circumstances until we speak in person. I thanked him for the advice, and as I sipped my coffee, a plan began to take shape. I wouldn't abandon my house, but I also wouldn't directly confront my daughter or son-in-law. Instead, I would create a situation where they themselves would abandon the idea. The next morning, I made another trip to Flagstaff. I visited the small-town veterinary clinic and partially explained my situation to Dr. Rivers, a kindly-looking gentleman who cared for the animals in the region. Dr. Helen, I understand your concern. We've actually had problems with snakes in the area this year, especially rattlesnakes. The excessive heat is bringing them closer to homes. I left the clinic with a vial of a harmless but rather strong-smelling product used to repel reptiles. I also bought some discarded snakeskins that the vet kept for studies. My next stop was the gardening store, where I purchased intensely smelling organic fertilizer and some plants known to attract insects. On the way back, I stopped at a hunting and fishing supply store, buying some small animal traps, the kind used only to capture animals alive without harming them. Back at the cabin, I implemented the first phase of the plan. I sprinkled the snake repellent at strategic points around the house, especially near the guest room and the bathroom. I placed the snake skins in places where they would be easily found, one under the guest room bed, another near the bathroom entrance. In the garden, I planted the insect-attracting species near the windows and spread the fertilizer generously. The smell was strong and unpleasant, but I knew it would fade in the coming days, remaining just long enough to cause discomfort. The traps were placed at strategic points on the perimeter of the house, not to catch animals, but to create the impression that the area was infested with small predators. Finally, I turned off the water heater and reduced the capacity of the filter that supplied the house, ensuring the water came out with a slight brownish color. Perfectly safe to drink, but visually unpleasant. When I was finished, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, observing my work. There was nothing dangerous or permanent in what I had done. It was just an elaborate staging, designed to make the stay uncomfortable enough for them to give up on their own. On Friday, I prepared for the guests' arrival. I put on my best smile and waited on the porch. Around 3 hours after 12 noon, an unfamiliar car appeared on the dirt road, kicking up dust. Robert was driving, with Marilyn beside him. In the back seat, Stanley and Eleanor looked tense and out of place. I greeted them warmly as they parked. My daughter was the first to get out, rushing to hug me. "Mum, are you okay? You look tired." "I'm great, dear," I replied, maintaining the smile, just adapting to country life. Robert and his parents approached with expressions ranging from discomfort to irritation. It was clear that none of them really wanted to be there. "Ms. Helen," Stanley extended his hand formally, "we appreciate your hospitality." Eleanor just nodded, her eyes scanning the cabin with obvious disapproval. "Let's go in," I suggested. "I made some coffee to welcome you." As soon as we entered, I realized the plan was beginning to work. Eleanor immediately wrinkled her nose. "What is that smell?" "Oh, it must be the natural fertilizer I use in the garden," I explained innocently. "The soil here needs extra nutrients. You'll get used to it in a few days or weeks." Robert examined the living room with a critical eye. "This place is smaller than it looked in the photos you showed." "It's cozy," I replied, pouring the coffee. "Perfect for one person. It will be a challenge to accommodate more people, but we'll do our best." I showed them around the house, saving the guest room for last. When I opened the door, I had to control my expression not to smile at the sight of Eleanor's horrified face as she saw the snakeskin partially visible under the bed. "What is that?" she shrieked, backing away. "Where?" I asked, leaning in to look. "Oh, another one. Sorry, we've been having a problem with snakes lately. The vet said it's normal this time of year. They come in looking for warmth, but they're harmless most of the time." "Most of the time?" Stanley repeated, paling. "Well, except for the rattlesnakes, of course. But don't worry. It's been almost 2 weeks since the last incident." Robert shot an alarmed look at Marilyn, who seemed equally disturbed. "Mum, you didn't mention anything about snakes." "I didn't want to worry you, dear. Besides, I'm learning to live with nature. It's part of the charm of the country." The bathroom elicited similar reactions when I turned on the faucet and the water came out with a brownish coloration. "It's just a little iron," I explained. "Perfectly safe to drink. And the shower, well, we only get hot water on really sunny days." That evening, as I prepared dinner, I overheard Robert and Marilyn talking quietly on the porch. I approached silently to listen. "This is unsustainable," Robert was saying. "My parents can't stay here. Did you see that snake?" "I'm worried too," Marilyn replied. "I think we underestimated how isolated this place is. And the water. We have to think of another solution," Robert concluded. I returned to the kitchen feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. My plan was working, but manipulating my own daughter made me uneasy. However, it was necessary. This house represented everything I had worked for. During dinner, I made sure to tell stories about the challenges of rural life, the scorpions that occasionally appeared in the corners, the difficulty of getting emergency medical assistance, the lack of cell phone signal. But do you know what's hardest? I commented, serving a simple dessert. The loneliness. Sometimes I go days without talking to anyone. I start talking to the walls. I laughed, as if I found the situation amusing. That's why I'm so happy for your company. The look of panic that Eleanor and Stanley exchanged was almost comical. That night, lying in my bed, I heard the agitated whispers coming from the next room. The plan was in motion, and I could already glimpse victory. But something inside me wondered, at what cost? The guests' first night went exactly as I planned. Around 2 hours after midnight, I remotely activated one of the traps outside the house, causing a loud bang. Then, using a flashlight, I projected shadows that looked like animals moving on the exterior walls. Eleanor's screams echoed through the house. "There's something out there! Robert, go check!" I calmly got up, putting on my robe, and found them all in the hallway, pale and scared. "It must just be a possum," I explained calmly. "They usually roam at night. Sometimes they get onto the porch, but they're harmless, unless you startle them." Robert, with a golf club he had brought in his luggage, looked more terrified than willing to face any creature. "A possum?" he whispered. "Are you sure? Or maybe a wild hog? They're also common around here." The next morning, coffee was served in an atmosphere of palpable tension. Eleanor had deep, dark circles under her eyes, and Stanley chewed silently, constantly looking out the window. "Sleep well?" I asked innocently. "It was different," Marilyn replied, trying to be diplomatic. "The noises from the brush are scary at first," I commented, pouring coffee. "But you'll get used to them. Now, about today, I have to go to town for groceries. Will you be okay alone? The cell phone signal only works at the top of the hill, just in case you need anything." The thought of being isolated without communication and clearly disturbed them, but they nodded stiffly. Before leaving, I made sure to lock my bedroom door. "Not out of distrust," I said, "but out of habit for someone who lives alone." In reality, I wanted to protect my important documents and personal items. I noticed Robert's calculating gaze following my movement. I spent the day in town, not only shopping, but also talking with my lawyer, Paul, who had flown in from New York City, especially to meet with me. "Helen, based on what you told me, there are indications that they might be attempting some kind of asset fraud," he explained, as he analyzed the documents I had brought. "I've seen cases like this. They start by moving in elderly relatives, and then they try to claim the property, alleging dependency or incapacity. What can I do to protect myself?" "First, I'm going to register a formal document declaring your full mental and physical capacity, with recent medical evaluations. Second, we will create a specific will, making it clear that the property cannot be sold or transferred without your explicit consent. And third, we'll install security cameras at the house, for your protection, of course." Returning to the cabin late that afternoon, I found an almost comical scene. Eleanor was sitting in the car, the door locked, refusing to go inside the house. Stanley was arguing heatedly with Robert on the porch, while Marilyn seemed to be crying in the kitchen. "Did something happen?" I asked, feigning surprise. "My mother found another reptile in the bathroom," Robert explained, barely containing his irritation. "And the water is completely yellow today." "Ah, it must be because it rained last night," I replied calmly. "It affects the well. As for the snake, it was probably just a small king snake. They like damp places." "A king snake?" Stanley exclaimed, his voice rising an octave. "They're generally harmless," I continued, unloading the groceries, "unless you provoke them. Anyway, I brought chicken for dinner. I hope you like strong seasoning. The chili peppers here are fantastic." During dinner, I kept the conversation on topics I knew would make them uncomfortable. The lack of nearby medical assistance, the frequent problems with water and electricity supply, the poisonous animals common in the region. Did you know we're the only ranch in a 30-mile radius without a health center? I commented, serving more chicken. People around here joke that if you have a heart attack, you'd better already be right with God. Eleanor barely touched her food. Stanley ate mechanically, as if each bite was a supreme effort. "And how long do you plan to stay?" I finally asked. "So I can organize the groceries." A heavy silence fell over the table. Robert cleared his throat. "Initially, we thought a few months, until their situation stabilized." "Wonderful," I exclaimed with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I've always wanted company. We can do so many things together. Tomorrow, I'll teach you how to identify wild mushrooms. There are some that are delicious, if you don't confuse them with the poisonous ones, that is." That night, the tension was so dense you could cut it with a knife. As everyone retired, I made sure to leave the front door unlocked. "Sometimes the neighbors show up in the middle of the night needing help," I explained. "Mr. Johnson lives 3 miles from here, and he has diabetes. I've helped him twice this month already." The next morning, I got up early and made strong coffee. I was setting the table when Robert appeared, looking as if he had slept even less than the day before. "Helen, we need to talk." "Of course, Robert. What's wrong?" He sat down at the table, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of clear discomfort. "I think we underestimated the peculiarities of rural life. My parents aren't adjusting well." "It's understandable," I replied, putting the teapot on the stove. "Life here is for adventurous spirits. Not everyone adapts to the isolation, the snakes, the insects." "Exactly," he interrupted me. "We're considering other options." I stifled a smile of satisfaction. What a shame. I was so happy for the company. But I understand, of course, their health and comfort come first. Before Robert could answer, we were interrupted by a scream coming from the guest room. Eleanor came running out, still in her pajamas, holding a shoe. "There was a huge spider in my shoe," she exclaimed, trembling, "the size of a saucer." "Ah, it must be a tarantula," I commented naturally. "They usually seek shelter in footwear. They're generally not venomous, but the bite can cause swelling and pain for a few days." Robert's face expressed a mixture of horror and determination. "It's decided. We're leaving today." Marilyn joined us, looking confused and distressed. "Today? But where will your parents go?" Robert hesitated, clearly not having thought about that. I seized the opportunity. "You know, I was just thinking," I began, serving coffee. "You mentioned that the house in New York City hasn't sold yet. Why don't you use it temporarily? It would be much more convenient for everyone, with hospitals nearby, clean water, no snakes." Robert and Marilyn exchanged meaningful looks. "That's not a bad idea," Marilyn said slowly. "We could postpone the sale for a few months." I watched in silence as the solution I had subtly planted began to sound like their own idea. Within 2 hours, the suitcases were being loaded back into the car. Eleanor looked rejuvenated just thinking about leaving the cabin, and Stanley didn't even bother to hide his relief. Marilyn hugged me goodbye. "I'm so sorry, Mum. We thought it would be a good solution, but we see that it's not viable. Are you really okay here alone?" "I'm in paradise, dear," I replied sincerely. "This simple life is everything I ever wanted." As the car drove away down the dirt road, I felt a wave of relief and, at the same time, a pang of guilt. I had manipulated my own family with lies and tricks, but I had defended my dream, my small piece of heaven that I had conquered with the sweat of 42 years of work. I went into the cabin and began cleaning up the traces of my plan. I collected the snake skins, removed the repellent, and cleaned the water filter. As I worked, I noticed something that had gone unnoticed in the confusion of the last few days. a folder of documents left on the living room table. I opened it, and my heart froze. They were papers for the transfer of ownership, already with spaces for my signature. Robert had brought everything prepared, clearly expecting to convince me, or coerce me, into transferring the cabin to his and Marilyn's name. The discovery confirmed my darkest suspicions. It wasn't paranoia. They really were planning to take over my house. The need of Robert's parents was just an excuse to get a foot in the door. I sat on the porch with the documents in my lap, looking at the mountains in the distance. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning, and I needed to be prepared. During the following week, I again enjoyed the silence and peace of my cabin, but with a sharp awareness that my victory might be temporary. I knew Robert well enough to know he wouldn't give up easily. The property transfer papers I found were just the beginning. I maintained daily contact with Paul, my lawyer, who was working to legally strengthen my position. I hired a private investigator, he informed me during one of our calls. We need to understand Robert's real financial situation and what other moves he might be making. I agreed with the measure, although I felt a pang of sadness at having reached this point. I never imagined my quiet retirement would involve investigating my own son-in-law. On a Wednesday morning, I received an unexpected phone call from Marilyn. "Mum, I need to talk to you in person. Can I come tomorrow?" Something in her voice put me on alert. It wasn't anger or manipulation, but a kind of resigned exhaustion. "Of course, dear. I'll come get you at the bus stop." "That won't be necessary. I'm driving." This surprised me. "Alone?" "Yes," she simply replied, and hung up. I spent the rest of the day in a state of vigilant anxiety, preparing the house and myself for whatever was coming. I called Paul and warned him, in case I needed immediate legal advice. Marilyn arrived early the next afternoon. When I saw her get out of the car, alone as she promised, I immediately noticed how tired she looked. She had lost weight, and her eyes carried a sadness that broke my heart. "Darling," I hugged her tightly. "It's good to see you." She returned the hug with an unusual intensity, as if she were holding back from breaking down. I made coffee, and we sat on the porch. For a few minutes, we just looked at the landscape in silence. "Mom," she finally began, "I know what Robert was planning." Her frankness took me by surprise. I expected denials, more manipulations, maybe even accusations. "What do you mean?" She sighed deeply. "The papers for the house transfer. I found copies in his office, along with some other disturbing documents." I put my cup on the table, giving her time to continue. "Robert didn't just lose his job. He ran up huge debts, gambling, risky investments. He used our house as collateral without consulting me. We're about to lose everything." My heart went out to my daughter, but I couldn't help but also feel a pang of validation. My suspicions were not unfounded. "He saw your cabin as a lifeline," she continued. "He planned to transfer the property, sell it quickly, and use the money to cover some of the debts. All this using his parents as an excuse." "And you knew about this?" She shook her head. The tears finally escaped. "Not all of it. He told me his parents needed temporary help. I only discovered the truth when I found the documents yesterday. We had an intense argument." I held her hand across the table. "I'm sorry, dear." "No, I'm sorry," she replied firmly. "I participated in this plan even without knowing all the implications. I pressured you to give up your dream. I never should have done that." We fell silent again, the weight of the revelations floating between us. "And now?" I finally asked. "I filed for divorce," she replied with a calm that seemed to have cost her a great deal to achieve. "Robert is desperate, and desperate people do terrible things. Later, I discovered he forged my signature on several documents. The information immediately alarmed me. He forged your signature? That's a crime, Marilyn. I know, she replied, drying her tears with the back of her hand. And it wasn't just that. I consulted a lawyer yesterday. He told me Robert opened a line of credit using our house as collateral without my consent. We are buried in debt I didn't even know existed. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. Not only was my cabin at risk, my daughter was a victim of financial fraud perpetrated by her own husband. And what do you plan to do now? First, make sure you are protected, she said, with a determination that reminded me of myself. I came to warn you that Robert is furious. He knows he failed to get your cabin and blames me for not being more persuasive. A chill ran down my spine. Do you think he might try something more direct? I don't know how far he'd go, but... She hesitated. I found notes about possible ways to prove you don't have the capacity to manage your own assets. He was looking into judicial guardianship. My blood ran cold. The tactic was more sinister than I had imagined. It wasn't just emotional manipulation, but an attempt to have me legally declared incompetent to take control of my assets. He mentioned having a contact at the Guardianship Council for Seniors, Marilyn continued. He talked about the possibility of requesting a forced psychiatric evaluation, alleging you are living in unsanitary conditions and exhibiting erratic behavior. Based on what? I asked indignantly. On the snakes, on the water problems, on your choice to live in isolation. He would twist everything he saw here to create a narrative that you are unfit to take care of yourself. I reached for my phone. I need to call Paul immediately. This is a serious threat. As I dialed, Marilyn put her hand over mine. Mum, I didn't just come to warn you. I came to help you protect yourself. The conversation with Paul was brief and focused. I explained the situation, and he immediately suggested a series of defensive measures. I'm going to get a full medical evaluation as soon as possible to document your full physical and mental capacity. I also suggest installing security cameras on the property and documenting any communication with Robert or his representatives. And, Helen, don't leave the cabin unoccupied for now. If you need to go out, ask someone trustworthy to stay on the premises. After hanging up, I explained the plan to Marilyn. To my surprise, she nodded determinedly. I'll stay with you for a few days, and I know exactly when Robert plans to act. He has a meeting scheduled with that council contact for next Tuesday. How do you know that? A sad smile crossed her face. He doesn't imagine I figured everything out. He still thinks I'm on his side, just annoyed. She left the calendar open on the computer. The meeting was marked as consultation on Helen's case. I spent the following days in a state of constant alert, alternating between preparing legal defenses with Paul and trying to provide some emotional comfort to my daughter. Marilyn swung between moments of fierce determination and periods of deep sadness, processing the betrayal she had suffered. On Sunday, while we were preparing lunch together, she finally talked about Robert's parents. They knew, Mum, maybe not all the details, but they knew Robert wanted your house. The story of their foreclosure was partially true. They really did lose their house due to debt, but not so recently. They had been living with Eleanor's sister for more than a year. So why the charade? Robert convinced them it would be a solution for everyone. They would have a place to live. He would solve his financial problems with the sale of the cabin. And you, well, in his version, you didn't really need this place and would be better off moving back to the city. The coldness of the calculation shocked me. And they easily agreed? When it comes to money, Robert's family has always been pragmatic. She chose the word carefully. I think they came to establish residency. They would stay long enough for you to feel uncomfortable and give up, and then Robert would sell the property, giving them a small share. And you, Marilyn, where did you fit into that plan? She lowered her gaze. He convinced me that you were being stubborn, isolating yourself here, that it was dangerous for a woman your age to live alone so far from everything. He said the cabin could be our country home, and that you would stay with us in New York City, where you belonged. My heart ached for the manipulation my daughter had suffered. Robert knew her weak points, the concern for my safety, the desire to have me close, and had exploited them for his own ends. On Tuesday morning, we received a visit from Paul, accompanied by a geriatric physician and a psychologist, both with impeccable credentials. I underwent a complete evaluation, documenting my physical and mental health. The reports were clear. I was in excellent condition for my age, fully capable of making my own decisions and caring for myself. I also recommend we make a video, Paul suggested, after the conclusion of the exams. A statement from you explaining your situation, your conscious choices, and the reasons why you chose to live here. We recorded the testimony on the porch, with the mountains as a backdrop. I spoke clearly about my career as a nurse, my retirement dream, the careful financial planning I had done, and how life in the cabin represented everything I had ever wanted. This is not an impulsive decision or a whim, I asserted to the camera. It is the result of 4 decades of hard work and careful planning. I am fully aware of the challenges of living in a rural area, and I have taken all the necessary precautions to ensure my safety and well-being. As I spoke, I noticed Marilyn watching with a complex expression, pride mixed with deep sadness. I realized she was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the full extent of my autonomy and determination. In the early afternoon, Paul left, taking all the necessary documentation to build our defense. Moments after his departure, the phone rang. It was Robert. "Helen, we need to talk." His voice sounded controlled, but with an underlying threat. "I'm worried about you living alone in that corner of the world." "I'm not alone, Robert. Marilyn is with me." A momentary silence. "Marilyn is with you? Since when?" "For a few days. We're having a wonderful time together." I heard his breathing change, his anger barely contained. "Put her on, please." I handed the phone to my daughter, who put it on speakerphone. "Marilyn, what are you doing there? We need to talk about the divorce and—" "There's nothing to talk about, Robert," she interrupted him with a firmness that filled me with pride. "I've already made my decision, and I found out about your plans for my mother." "What plans? What are you talking about?" "The property transfer papers. The consultation scheduled for today with your friend from the Guardianship Council. The attempt to have my mother declared incompetent." Another, longer silence. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice now clearly agitated. "We're on the verge of ruin. I need solutions." "Your debts are not my mother's problem," Marilyn replied firmly. "Or mine. We'll resolve this legally through the divorce." "You can't do this to me." "I already did. And one more thing, Robert. If you try anything against my mother, anything at all, I have enough evidence to incriminate you for signature forgery and fraud. Think carefully before you act." She hung up the phone and sank into a chair, trembling slightly. "I'm proud of you," I said, taking her hand. "I learned from the best," she replied with a small smile. "I just hope this is enough to stop him." Unfortunately, it wasn't. The next morning, as we were having coffee on the porch, an official car parked at the property entrance. A middle-aged woman, with a serious expression and a folder in her hand, approached. "Ms. Helen Smith?" she asked formally. "That's me." "I'm Vanessa Jones, a social worker from the County Senior Council. We received a complaint about your situation, and I came to conduct an evaluation. Marilyn and I exchanged glances. Robert had gone ahead with his plan, even after our warnings. Of course, Ms. Jones, I replied calmly. Please come in. We were just having coffee. Would you like a cup? The woman seemed momentarily taken aback by my receptiveness. No, thank you. This will just be a formal visit. We led Vanessa inside the cabin, which was impeccably tidy. I noticed her professional eyes evaluating every detail. The cleanliness, the organization, the medications neatly arranged in the kitchen cabinet, the abundance of fresh food. We received a complaint alleging that you are living in unsanitary conditions and possibly exhibiting mental confusion, she explained, consulting her notes. Interesting, I replied, maintaining my composure. And who made that complaint? I cannot reveal that, but it was a concerned family member. Marilyn stepped forward. It was my husband, Robert Brown, wasn't it? We are in the process of divorce, and he is trying to gain control of my mother's assets. The social worker didn't confirm it, but her look revealed that Marilyn was right. Ms. Jones, I continued, anticipating this type of situation, I prepared some documents that I would like you to examine. I handed her the complete medical report, the psychological evaluation, and a copy of the video recording, all organized in a folder. As you can see, I underwent exhaustive medical and psychological evaluations less than 24 hours ago. The professionals attested to my full capacity. I also have the contacts of my lawyer here, who is aware of this situation. Vanessa examined the documents with increasing surprise. This is very complete, she observed. We rarely see complaints answered with such meticulous documentation. It's not a coincidence, Marilyn explained. We knew my husband would attempt something like this. He forged my signature on financial documents and is trying to take control of my mother's property, alleging her incapacity. The social worker frowned, clearly not expecting this level of preparation and counterclaim. I understand. Well, I still need to complete my evaluation, but these documents will certainly be taken into consideration. I spent the next hour answering Vanessa's questions, demonstrating my lucidity and autonomy. I showed her the cabin, explaining the security systems I had installed, the stock of food and medications, my plan for medical emergencies. When we returned to the porch, she seemed satisfied. Ms. Helen, based on what I saw today and the documentation presented, I find no evidence to corroborate the allegations in the complaint. You seem perfectly capable of caring for yourself and managing your assets. Thank you for your fair assessment, I replied. Before leaving, Vanessa hesitated, as if considering whether she should say something more. If you'll permit a personal comment, Ms. Helen, it's rare to see a person your age so well prepared and organized. You clearly planned every aspect of this move with exceptional care. 42 years of planning, Ms. Jones, I replied with a smile. When you wait that long for a dream, you leave nothing to chance. After her departure, Marilyn and I hugged, finally allowing ourselves to feel the relief of having overcome another barrier. But we both knew the war was far from over. He won't give up easily, Marilyn said, as we watched the social worker's car drive away. Especially now, knowing I'm against him. Then we'll continue to protect ourselves, I replied, with the determination that had sustained me throughout my life. Together. That evening, as we prepared dinner, I received a message from Paul. I registered all the documents. Your property is legally bulletproof. No one can challenge it without facing a full judicial process. I showed the message to Marilyn, who smiled with relief. One less problem. But I knew from the determined gleam in her eyes that she was thinking about the next step. Not just defending herself, but fighting back. In the following week, Paul presented me with a complete legal strategy. In addition to protecting my property, he was prepared to initiate action against Robert for attempted fraud and coercion. We have enough evidence of his intentions, he explained during a video call. The property transfer papers, the false complaint to the senior counsel, Marilyn's forged signatures. We can initiate criminal proceedings if we want. I looked at my daughter, who was listening attentively beside me. The decision would mainly affect her. What do you think, Marilyn? She took a deep breath. Part of me wants to see him face all the legal consequences, but another part, we have the girls to think about. Criminal proceedings against their father would be traumatic. Paul nodded understandingly. There is a third option. We can use the threat of legal action as leverage for a divorce settlement. He relinquishes any claim to your house, takes full responsibility for the debts he incurred, and we don't proceed with the criminal charges. And my cabin? I asked. How do we guarantee he won't try again? I've already taken care of that, Paul replied. I set up an irrevocable trust. The property is legally protected and can only be transferred under the conditions you specified. To Marilyn after your passing, or to your granddaughters in case Marilyn is no longer alive. Not even you can alter those conditions now. The news brought me immense relief. My small paradise was finally secure. There's one more thing, Paul continued. We investigated Robert's debts. He owes money to dangerous people, Helen. Some of the money came from loan sharks. This revelation brought a new dimension of concern. Robert was not only desperate for money, but potentially dealing with criminals. What does this mean for our safety? Marilyn asked, visibly alarmed. It means we have to be extremely cautious, Paul replied. I suggest the two of you don't stay alone for now. I hired a private security guard who can remain on the property while we resolve this situation. Initially, I resisted the idea of having a stranger in my sanctuary, but Marilyn's safety was a priority. I accepted Paul's recommendation. John, the security guard, arrived the next day. A middle-aged man, discreet and professional, a former state trooper with personal protection experience. He settled into a small room attached to the garage, almost imperceptible except for his reassuring presence. I won't interfere with your routine, Miss Helen, he assured me. I'm just here as a precaution. His presence proved to be providential just 3 days later. It was almost midnight when the silent alarm on the property went off. John discreetly woke us up. We have movement on the south perimeter, he informed us in a low voice. 2 people. They seem to be casing the house. My heart raced. Robert? I can't identify him. Stay in the room. Lock the door. I've already notified local police. John silently disappeared, moving like a shadow to check the situation. Marilyn and I stayed in my room, the door locked, listening intently. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard agitated voices, followed by the sound of a car speeding away. Minutes later, John returned. It was 2 men, he explained. It wasn't Robert. From their behavior and the equipment they carried, they were professionals, probably debt collectors. Oh my gosh, Marilyn whispered. Did they come here for him? More likely they came to assess the property, John replied. People like that usually investigate all potential assets before making a direct approach. The police arrived half an hour later, documented the incident, and swept the area. They didn't find anyone, but they reinforced security on the nearby roads for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. Sitting in the kitchen with Marilyn, both drinking tea to calm our nerves, I reflected on how my peaceful sanctuary had been transformed into a war zone. This has gone too far, I finally said. Robert put not only my possessions, but our physical safety at risk. Marilyn nodded, her face pale in the dim light. We need to resolve this definitively, Mum. We can't live in fear. The next morning, Paul was informed of the incident and immediately intensified his efforts. I'm going to contact Robert today, he declared. He needs to understand the gravity of the situation. While we waited for news, Marilyn and I tried to maintain some normality, continuing our daily routines under John's discreet surveillance. The tension was palpable, but I refused to be driven out of my own home by fear. On the third day after the incident, Paul brought us surprising news. Robert accepted all the conditions, he announced during our daily video call. No objections, no additional claims. He will assume all the debts, relinquish any right to the house in New York City, and committed never to interfere again in matters related to Helen's property. Why the sudden change? Marilyn asked suspiciously. Apparently he had an encounter with his creditors, Paul explained. I don't have details, but from what I understood, it was persuasive enough to make him seek an immediate solution. I exchanged glances with Marilyn. We both knew what persuasive probably meant when it came to loan sharks. Is he physically okay? I asked, surprising myself with the concern. Yes, as far as I know. Scared, but unharmed, and much more cooperative. The settlement papers were signed 2 days later. Robert appeared at Paul's office in New York City, while Marilyn and I signed our part in the nearest town. There was no direct contact, which was a relief. With the agreement finalized, I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. My cabin was secure. Marilyn was legally protected. The debts would be Robert's exclusive responsibility. After a week without incidents, John deemed it safe to end his surveillance, although he installed a reinforced security system before leaving. The property is well protected now, Ms. Helen, he assured me. Cameras, motion sensors, direct connection to local police. You will be safe. I sincerely thanked him for his protection, feeling that I had gained not only a security guard, but a friend. With the legal situation resolved and security established, Marilyn and I finally had time to reflect on the future. She had taken a leave of absence from the school where she taught in New York City, but the period was coming to an end. What do you plan to do now, dear? I asked one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on the porch. She contemplated the stars for a moment before answering. I don't want to go back to New York City. There are too many painful memories there, and the girls need stability. I've been thinking about looking for a position at the local school. The idea of having my daughter and granddaughters nearby filled me with joy, but I tried to contain my enthusiasm. Are you sure? That's a huge change. And what about the girls? How do they feel? They love coming here. They've always asked to spend more time at Grandma's farm, she smiled. And honestly, Mum, after all this, I realize how valuable it is to have you close, not as a dependency, but as a partnership. That night, we planned the transition. Marilyn would sell the house in New York City as soon as the divorce was finalized. With the money, she would buy a small house in the town nearest my cabin. The girls would attend the local school, and she would look for a teaching position. It won't be the same life we had, she acknowledged, but maybe it will be better. 2 weeks later, we received a visit from my granddaughters, Leah and Bree, 12 and 9 years old. Robert had agreed to let them spend the weekend with us, a small test for the new reality we were building. Watching them running around the property, exploring the woods, feeding the birds that visited my feeders, brought a joy I hadn't felt in months. Their laughter echoed through the valley, healing something deep inside me. On Saturday night, sitting around the fire pit I had prepared in the backyard, Bree leaned her head on my shoulder. Grandma, when we move closer, will you teach us how to make bread like today's? Of course, dear, I replied, feeling tears forming, and many other things. Bree, Mum said it's still not certain that we're moving, Leah corrected, always the more cautious of the two. But I want to, Bree exclaimed. In the city, we can't have a dog in the apartment. Here, we can have dogs, chickens, Even a pony? Marilyn laughed, exchanging glances with me. Let's take it slow, young lady. First the house, then we'll discuss the petting zoo. In that moment, looking at my family gathered around the fire, under the starry sky that only the country can offer, I felt a deep certainty. All the suffering, all the struggle, had been worth it. My dream of a quiet retirement had been threatened, but I emerged from the battle with something even more precious. Not just the cabin, but the promise of a life shared with my daughter and granddaughters. A legacy of strength, determination, and love that would endure long after I was gone. The next day, as I waved goodbye to the car taking my granddaughters back to the city, I made a silent promise to myself. This property, conquered with so much sacrifice and defended with such determination, would become the safe haven my family deserved, and no one would ever take it from us again. The seasons changed, bringing new rhythms to our life. Autumn arrived with its golden afternoons and cool nights, perfect for sitting on the porch with a blanket on my knees, watching the leaves dance in the wind. Marilyn's divorce was finalized in October, faster than expected thanks to Robert's unusual cooperation. The house in New York City was immediately put up for sale, with 3 interested buyers in the very first week. Apparently, Robert had moved to the south, seeking to start over away from the debts and the past. He called to talk to the girls, Marilyn told me one evening. He sounded different, more humble, maybe. He said he's working at his cousin's company in Florida. Do you think he's really changed? She considered the question for a moment. I don't know. Maybe the scare was strong enough to shake him. Or maybe it's just a new strategy. Either way, I'm keeping my distance, but allowing contact with the girls. They deserve to have a father, even if he's imperfect. In November, we found the perfect house for Marilyn and the girls. A cozy 3-bedroom home in the small town of Sedona, Arizona, just 20 minutes' drive from my cabin. The yard was spacious, with room for the vegetable garden Leah wanted so much, and for the dog Bree kept mentioning. The local school had a vacancy for a science teacher, Marilyn's area, starting in the new school year in February. Everything seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle finally finding its form. The move happened in December, with the help of Paul and his wife Anne, who flew in from New York City especially for the occasion. In 2 days, the house was set up and cozy, ready for its first Christmas. It's smaller than we were used to, Marilyn commented as we hung lights on the small Christmas tree. But I feel like I can breathe here. I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes, smaller spaces offer more freedom than the mansions that imprison us with their demands and maintenance. Christmas was simple and perfect. We prepared dinner together, with the girls helping to decorate the gingerbread cookies. We sang carols around the table, and for the first time in many years, I felt completely at peace. Grandma, can we go look at the stars on your porch later? Bree asked as we did the dishes. Of course, dear. The sky will be especially beautiful tonight. Later, as the 4 of us snuggled under blankets on my porch, watching a sky speckled with thousands of stars, Leah made a surprising observation. I think everything happened as it was supposed to. What do you mean, honey? Marilyn asked. If Dad hadn't tried to take Grandma's house, we wouldn't be here now, all together, and I like it much better here than New York City. The wisdom of that 12-year-old girl moved me deeply. Indeed, the adversities had paved the way for a new life that we might never have imagined or chosen on our own. January brought heavy rains that transformed the landscape into vibrant shades of green. I spent hours helping Marilyn and the girls plant their first vegetable garden. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, herbs. I taught them what I had learned from my own experience, feeling the joy of passing on knowledge that could sustain generations. At the end of the month, the newest family member arrived. Thor, a golden-haired mixed breed that Bree chose at the local shelter. The dog, medium-sized and with endless energy, quickly adapted to the new family, following Bree everywhere like a golden shadow and sleeping at the foot of her bed every night. February arrived with the start of classes. Marilyn began her new job as a science teacher, nervous but enthusiastic about the challenge. The girls entered the local school, initially apprehensive. They soon made friends who helped them with the transition. Life began to find a quiet, comforting rhythm. It was during this period that I began to think more about the future of the property. Although Paul had legally guaranteed that the cabin would pass to Marilyn after my death, I felt the need to do more than simply preserve it. "I've been thinking," I told Marilyn during one of our Sunday lunches, "about expanding the property a little." "Expanding how?" "The neighbouring land is for sale. It's 3 more acres, with a spring and an old pecan orchard. It would be a good addition." Marilyn looked at me surprised. "You want to buy more land? I thought the cabin was your final dream." It was, or so I thought. I looked out the window, watching Leah and Bree playing with Thor in the backyard. But now I realize that dreams can grow. I imagine this place not just as my refuge, but as a legacy for the 3 of you. A place where the girls can grow up connected with nature, where they can bring their own children someday. "I don't know if we have the financial means to expand right now," Marilyn replied cautiously. "We're still getting settled." "I do," I replied simply. "I saved for longer than I needed for the cabin. I have a substantial reserve." The following week, we visited the land together. It was a beautiful property, slightly sloping, with a small valley where a crystal-clear stream ran. The orchard, though needing care, had huge trees that promised abundant fruit. "We could build a second house here," I suggested, pointing to a flat area overlooking the valley. "Not now, but eventually. A bigger house for you when the girls grow up. We could connect the properties with a trail." I saw Marilyn's eyes light up as she imagined the possibilities. The dream was beginning to grow within her too. We bought the land at the end of February, an investment in the future that represented much more than acres of land. It was a commitment to the life we were building, a declaration that we had chosen this path not only as a temporary refuge, but as our new reality. In March, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope had the letterhead of a Florida law firm, and for a moment I felt my heart race with the concern that Robert was attempting some new legal tactic. But the content completely surprised me. It was a personal letter from Robert, not a legal document, handwritten on plain paper, not the firm's letterhead. "Ms. Helen, I know you must be surprised to receive this letter, perhaps even worried. I want to assure you that there is no threat or strategy here, only feelings that need to be expressed. I have no justification for my behavior. What I did was unforgivable. I tried to take something that meant everything to you, something you conquered with decades of honest work, while I sought an easy solution for problems I created with my own hands. The last few months have forced me to face painful truths about myself. The person I became was not someone I could be proud of. I was not the father my daughters deserved, or the man I once promised to be. I am in therapy now. I work in a modest but honest position at my cousin's company. I am gradually paying off my debts, living simply. I don't expect forgiveness, not from you or from Marilyn. I just wanted you to know that I finally understood the value of what I tried to steal. Not just a property, but a dream, a life achievement, a symbol of dignity and independence. I hope you find all the peace and happiness you deserve in your cabin. And I thank you, strange as it may seem, for having fought with such determination. Your strength showed me the kind of character I hope to one day develop. Respectfully, Robert. I reread the letter several times, searching for manipulation or falsehood between the lines. But time taught me to recognize sincerity, and something in those words rang true. I showed the letter to Marilyn that evening. She read it in silence, emotions passing over her face like clouds on a windy day. "Do you believe him?" I finally asked. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "Maybe. The girls say he sounds different on the weekly calls, more present, more interested in their real lives, not just asking superficial questions." "People can change," I commented, "especially when they face the consequences of their actions." "Maybe," Marilyn nodded, "but trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild." "Not impossible, though," I replied gently, "just extremely difficult, and it's earned slowly, with consistent actions over time." Life continued its course, with the small joys and challenges of daily life gradually replacing the major dramas of the previous months. We planted fruit trees on the new land. We established the trail that connected the two properties, and I started teaching the girls the names of native plants and their properties. One May afternoon, while we were harvesting pecans in the newly acquired orchard, Bree made an observation that deeply touched my heart. "Grandma, did you know the oldest trees give the best fruit?" she asked, her face and hands purple from the fruit juice. "It's true," I confirmed. "These trees are at least 60 years old, maybe more." "Just like you," she exclaimed innocently. "You also got better with age." "How so, dear?" "Mom said you were always great, but before you were quieter, always doing what others wanted. Now you're strong and determined, like a big tree that no one can chop down." I looked at Marilyn, who smiled sheepishly. "Kids and their candid mouths," she commented. "But it's true," Bree continued. "Grandma taught us to be strong. When a girl at school bothered me, I remembered what Grandma did when the bad people tried to take her cabin. I stood my ground and didn't let the girl make me cry." I hugged my granddaughter, feeling an emotion that went beyond words. Without realizing it, I had passed on more than practical knowledge about plants and animals. I had shown them the value of determination, of courage, of fighting for what we love. That evening, sitting alone on my porch, I reflected on the journey of the last few months. What began as a threat to my retirement dream had transformed into something much greater: the creation of a new kind of life for my entire family. The cabin I had defended with such determination was no longer just my personal refuge, but the heart of a small family universe we were building together. My granddaughters would grow up knowing the taste of fruit picked directly from the tree, the sound of silence in the rural mornings, the incomparable brilliance of the stars away from light pollution. In June, I received an unexpected call from Paul. "Helen, I have some interesting news," he announced. "Remember that evaluation the social worker did at your cabin?" "Yes." "Apparently, your case generated discussions at the senior council." "What kind of discussions?" "Positive ones," he assured me. "They were impressed with your preparedness, your autonomy, your ability to defend yourself against attempts at financial exploitation. They want to invite you to participate in a panel on senior rights and the prevention of asset abuse." The idea took me by surprise. "A panel? Me? I've never been a public speaker, Paul." "It would just be an informal conversation sharing your experience. Many seniors face similar situations and don't know how to protect themselves. Your story could help them." After a few days of reflection, I accepted the invitation. The event would take place in August in the closest big city for an audience of approximately 50 people. Seniors from the region, social workers, lawyers specializing in senior law. Marilyn offered to accompany me. "I can help you organize your ideas, Mom. You have a lot to share." In the following weeks, we worked together preparing my presentation. It wouldn't be a formal speech, but I wanted to be clear about the main points I wanted to address. "The most important thing," I explained to Marilyn as we organized the notes, is for other seniors to understand that planning isn't just about money, it's about autonomy, about the right to choose how and where we want to live our final years. On the day of the event, I arrived nervous but determined. The room was full, not just the expected 50 participants, but almost 80 people of all ages. Apparently, the topic had sparked more interest than anticipated. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that reflected my own experiences. Older women and men, many accompanied by adult children, some alone, all seeking guidance on navigating the complex territories of old age, independence, and family relationships. "My name is Helen," I began, "and at 65 years old, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed." I told my story without unnecessary dramatization, focusing on the practical aspects, the importance of legal documentation, the need to know your rights, the value of allies like Paul, the courage to establish clear boundaries with family members. Many of us were raised to always give in, always accommodate, always prioritize the wishes of others above our own, I explained, especially the women of my generation. We are told that it's selfish to think of ourselves, that we must sacrifice our dreams for the dreams of children and grandchildren. I noticed several nods of recognition in the audience. But there came a moment when I realized a fundamental truth. Taking care of myself is not selfishness, it's necessity. As a nurse, I always taught my patients that we can't give from an empty well. We need to strengthen ourselves first, and only then can we help others. I spoke about the importance of creating support systems that don't depend exclusively on family members, about how to document situations of pressure or abuse, about how to establish legal protections for hard-earned assets. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. In the following minutes, I was approached by various participants, many seniors with stories similar to mine, some professionals impressed with the strategies I had developed, even young people who wanted guidance on how to help their parents or grandparents preserve their autonomy. One lady, in particular, moved me. Mary, 72 years old, a widow, who had been pressured by her son to sell her house and move to a room in the back of his residence. "Listening to you today gave me courage," she said, holding my hands. "I'm going to find a lawyer tomorrow. I don't want to sell my house. It's where I lived with my husband for 40 years, where I have my memories, my neighbors, my independence." On the way home, Marilyn drove in silence until she finally commented, "I'm so proud of you, Mum. You know that, right?" "Thank you, dear. But why, exactly?" "For everything. For fighting for what you believed in. For showing me that it's never too late to set boundaries. For now helping other seniors to do the same." She paused before adding, "And for giving me a second chance, even when I disappointed you." "You never disappointed me," I replied firmly. "You were manipulated, just as I was many times in my life. The difference is that you had the courage to recognize it and change direction. Many people never achieve that." We arrived home at sunset, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The girls came running to greet us, eager to hear about the event. I told them about the people I met, the stories I heard, the impact my experience had made. "Does that mean you're famous now, Grandma?" Bree asked with wide eyes. I laughed heartily. "No way. It just means that sometimes, when we share our difficulties, we discover we're not alone, and that can make all the difference." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I stayed once again alone on my porch, watching the stars. The silence I had longed for enveloped me like a blanket, no longer as a solitary refuge, but as a sacred space where I could reflect on the unexpected blessings that had emerged from such turbulent times. I realized that in defending my cabin, I had actually discovered a more complete and authentic version of myself. A Helen who wasn't afraid to set boundaries, who knew her own worth, who could inspire others with her experience. And perhaps that was the real gift that retirement brought me. Not just a physical place to call mine, but an inner space of autonomy and wisdom that no one could ever take away from me. The first anniversary of my move to the cabin arrived on a perfect spring Sunday. The sky was an intense blue, speckled with white clouds that looked like cotton. The trees had donned new leaves, and wildflowers coloured the fields around the property. Marilyn and the girls prepared a surprise. A special lunch in the area we had transformed into a small vegetable patch on the newly acquired land. They set up a rustic table under the shade of the pecan trees, decorated with flowers picked on the property, and embroidered tablecloths they found at a town bazaar. To commemorate a year of resilience and rebirth, Marilyn toasted, raising a glass of homemade wine we had learned to make with a neighbour. The girls also prepared gifts. Leah gave me a handmade book where she had recorded, in her neat handwriting, all the medicinal plants we had identified on the property, complete with detailed drawings and notes on their uses. Bree had built, with the help of the school art teacher, a carved wooden sign for the property entrance. Helen's Haven, conquered with grit, protected with love. So no one ever forgets that this land is yours by right, Grandma, she explained seriously. That day marked not only the anniversary of my move, but also the beginning of a new family tradition. We decided that every March we would celebrate Resistance Day, as Bree affectionately named it. A time to remember that some dreams are worth fighting for, and that true family is strengthened, not weakened, by adversity. As the months passed, our small community grew in unexpected ways. Paul and his wife, Anne, enchanted with the region during their visits, bought a small farm a few miles away to spend weekends and eventually retire there too. John, the security guard who protected us during the most tense moments, opened a rural security consulting business in the nearby town and frequently visited us, bringing new technology and tips to keep the property safe without sacrificing its natural beauty. And then there was Vanessa, the social worker who had investigated the complaint against me. After the panel on senior rights, she sought me out for a frank conversation. "Your case changed my professional focus," she confessed. "I realized that we often see seniors as vulnerable people who need to be protected, forgetting that they also have the right to self-determination and independence." She began visiting me occasionally, initially for professional reasons. She wanted to learn more about how I had structured my rural life to maintain autonomy even in advanced age. Over time, our conversations evolved into a genuine friendship, based on mutual respect and a shared interest in protecting the rights of seniors. On one of those visits, she brought an unexpected proposal. "Helen, we're developing a pilot program at the Senior Council focused on preventing financial abuse and promoting autonomy. I would like you to consider being a volunteer mentor, sharing your experience with other vulnerable seniors." The idea took me by surprise. A mentor? Me? I don't have training for that, Vanessa. You have something more valuable: lived experience, practical knowledge, and an incredible ability to face challenges without losing dignity or compassion. I accepted the invitation after some reflection. Once a month, I would spend an afternoon at the community centre in town, advising seniors who were facing family pressure, attempts at manipulation, or simply seeking guidance on how to maintain their independence as they aged. This new role brought me deep and unexpected satisfaction. After decades caring for people's bodies as a nurse, I was now caring for their rights, their autonomy, their dignity. Every story I heard resonated in some way with my own journey. Every small victory I witnessed, a senior woman who managed to keep her house against her children's pressure, a gentleman who learned to manage his own finances after years of dependency, reminded me that my own struggle had been worthwhile not only for me, but for all those who were inspired by it. In September, I received an unexpected email from a regional publisher. Someone who had attended the panel on senior rights suggested that my story could be turned into a small book, part of a collection on active and conscious aging. "I'm not a writer," I initially replied. "You don't need to be," the editor assured me. "We can assign someone to record your memories and knowledge. You would just share your story, and we would take care of the rest." Marilyn strongly encouraged me. "Mum, think of how many people you could help. There are so many seniors facing similar pressures without knowing how to protect themselves." The book project moved forward slowly, with weekly interviews where I shared not only the story of the cabin, but my entire trajectory. The decades as a single nurse saving every penny, the meticulous planning for retirement, the challenges of setting boundaries with family, the practical strategies for maintaining independence in old age. "I don't want it to be just about me," I insisted. "I want it to be a practical guide, something other people can use as a reference when facing similar situations." In November, something happened that I never imagined possible. Marilyn sought me out with an expression undecided between worried and hopeful. "Robert called. He wants to visit the girls here, if you allow it." My first instinct was to immediately refuse. The memory of his attempts to take my property was still vivid. But seeing Marilyn's expression, the complexity of her emotions, the evident desire for her daughters to maintain some relationship with their father, I realized I needed to consider more than just my own feelings. "Do you feel comfortable with that?" I asked. "I still don't completely trust him," she replied honestly. "But the girls miss him, and he has made an effort in recent months. He calls regularly, sends small but meaningful gifts, shows genuine interest in their real lives. I think he deserves a chance to show he's truly changed." After much reflection, I agreed to the visit, but with clear conditions. Robert would stay in town, not at our homes. The meetings with the girls would happen in public places, or at Marilyn's house, never on my property. And there would always be a trusted adult nearby, not to ostentatiously supervise, but to ensure the emotional safety of everyone. When the day arrived, I confess I was tense. I watched from Marilyn's kitchen window as the rented car parked in the driveway. Robert got out, carrying 2 small wrapped packages. He was thinner, with slightly greying hair at the temples. His face had an expression I didn't immediately recognize, but later identified as humility, something I had never associated with him. The girls ran to hug him, and for a moment, I saw something genuine in his response. The real emotion of a father reuniting with his daughters after months of separation. I stepped away from the window, giving them privacy for that moment. Later, when Marilyn invited me to join them for afternoon tea, I found Robert in the living room. Our eyes met briefly before he lowered his gaze. "Ms. Helen," he greeted me formally. "Thank you for allowing this visit. It means a lot to me to be able to see the girls." "They missed you too," I replied neutrally. An awkward silence followed, broken only when Bree ran in to show me the gift she had received. A small but good quality telescope. "Dad said that here in the country, away from the city lights, I'll be able to see many more stars than in New York City," she explained excitedly. I looked at Robert, surprised by the appropriate choice of the gift, something that recognized and valued the girls' new lifestyle, rather than reinforcing what they had left behind. "That was an excellent choice," I commented, allowing myself a small smile. "We have fantastic skies here." The visit lasted 3 days. Robert remained respectful and distant with me, focusing his attention on his daughters. On the last night, after the girls went to sleep, he asked to speak with Marilyn and me. I know words don't mean much after everything that happened, he began, visibly nervous. But I want you to know that I am genuinely remorseful, not just for what I tried to do, but for who I became. He spoke about his therapy process, about the work with his cousin that was teaching him humility, about the financial control program he was following to pay off his debts. I don't expect immediate forgiveness or trust. I know I need to earn them back with time and consistency. I just want the chance to be a present father to my daughters and perhaps, eventually, someone you don't completely despise. Marilyn and I exchanged glances. There was sincerity in his words, but we also knew that the real test would come with time. The girls need their father, Marilyn finally replied, and you have made an effort in recent months. We will continue to allow visits, as long as you maintain this responsible behavior. That's all I ask, he replied with evident relief. A chance to prove I can be better. When Robert left the next morning, I watched from the window as he said goodbye to his daughters with long hugs. There was a fragility in him that I had never noticed before, an awareness that everything he held most precious could be lost through his own actions. In the months that followed, he kept his word, visiting regularly and remaining respectful of the boundaries we established. He wasn't perfect, but he was visibly trying. The girls flourished with their father's presence in their lives, even if it was now in a different capacity. In March of the second year, we again celebrated Resistance Day, our commemoration of the anniversary of my move to the cabin. This time, the event was bigger. Paul and Anne came from New York City. John brought his new girlfriend. Vanessa participated enthusiastically, and even Robert was invited, although with some initial hesitation on my part. As everyone gathered around the table in the orchard, I looked at that improbable group. People that destiny had brought together through circumstances that initially seemed only painful, but which ended up creating meaningful connections. Marilyn raised her glass for a toast. To my mother, Helen, who taught us that some dreams are so important that they are worth fighting for with all your strength, who showed us that setting boundaries is not selfishness, but self-love, and who proved that it's never too late to discover your own strength. As everyone raised their glasses, a deep emotion washed over me. The path had been difficult, full of unpleasant surprises and challenges I never imagined facing at 65 years old. But looking at my expanded family, not only by blood ties, but by connections of respect and mutual support, I realized that I had received much more than just the cabin I had dreamed of so much. I had received a new beginning, a second chance to live authentically, setting healthy boundaries and cultivating relationships based on true respect, not empty obligation or emotional manipulation. My book, The Age of Resilience: How to Protect Your Dreams and Dignity in Your Senior Years, was published in the fall of that year. It didn't become a national bestseller, but it found its audience salty. Seniors looking for inspiration to defend their autonomy, professionals working with the elderly, family members seeking to better understand the needs and rights of their older loved ones. The talks and counseling sessions at the community centre continued, now complemented by a small support group for seniors facing family pressure. We called the group Voices of Experience, a name that recognized not only the vulnerability that comes with age, but also the wisdom and courage we accumulate over decades of life. One afternoon, returning from one of those sessions, I found Bree sitting on my cabin porch, waiting for me. At 10 years old now, she had become an observant and sensitive child, often seeking my company for conversations that were surprising in their depth. "Grandma," she began as soon as I sat down beside her. "At school, the teacher asked us to write about our hero. Can I write about you?" The question took me by surprise, causing a lump in my throat. "Me? Dear, I'm nobody's hero. Just a stubborn old woman who didn't want to give up her corner. She shook her head with conviction. That's not true. You showed that even when people try to make you believe you don't deserve something, you can fight for what is yours. That's being a hero. I hugged her, unable to respond with words. How could I explain to a child that the true heroism was in people like her mother, who had the courage to recognize manipulation and start over? Or in so many seniors I met at the community center, facing challenges much greater than mine with dignity and perseverance? If you want to write about me, I'll be honored, I finally replied. But remember that the real hero of our story is your mother, who had the courage to start anew and build something new for you. Bree smiled, satisfied with my answer. I can write about both of you. The teacher said we can have more than one hero. The seasons continued their relentless cycle. Winter arrived with cold morning and fogs that enveloped the cabin like a protective blanket. On the coldest nights, we sat around the fireplace, sometimes just me and my thoughts, other times with Marilyn and the girls sharing stories and planning the future. One of those plans began to take concrete shape with the arrival of spring. The idea arose during one of the Voices of Experience group meetings, when several participants expressed a desire to live in a place like my cabin, but feared the isolation and practical challenges. What if we created a community? Suggested Mary, the lady who had sought me out after the panel on senior rights. Not a nursing home or retirement home, but a place where independent seniors could have their own homes, but close enough for mutual support. The idea resonated strongly with me. Discussing it with Vanessa, Paul, and Marilyn, we began to develop a concept for Senior Village. Small homes adapted for accessibility, with common areas for socialization, community gardens, and a mutual support system that would allow residents to maintain their independence without the isolation that many feared. We could use part of the new land, Marilyn suggested. The area near the main road would be perfect, accessible, but without interfering with your privacy. The project grew quickly, attracting the attention of social investors and the local government, who saw it as an innovative solution for the region's aging population. With the help of Paul for the legal issues, Vanessa for the social aspects, and an architect specializing in senior design, the blueprints for Resilience Village began to take shape. I like the name, Mary commented during one of the planning meetings. It reminds us that aging well is an act of resistance in a society that tries to make us invisible. In the midst of all these developments, I received a surprising call from Robert. It was the first time he had contacted me directly since his visit. "Ms. Helen," he began hesitantly, "I hope I'm not bothering you." "You're not, Robert. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm calling to offer help. I heard about the Resilience Village project through the girls. I now work with systems development, and I thought I could contribute by creating a digital platform to connect residents with each other and with local services." The offer took me completely by surprise. "Why would you do that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Because I need to do something to make up for the harm I caused. Not just to you or Marilyn, but to restore my own sense of dignity. And because it's a project that would benefit people like my own parents, who are now aging without having planned properly." After consulting with Marilyn and the others involved in the project, we accepted Robert's offer. He would be a remote collaborator, developing the digital system without needing direct involvement in the project administration. It was a small gesture of reconciliation. Not complete, perhaps it never would be, but a recognition that people can change and that reparation, even imperfect, has value. When the third anniversary of my move to the cabin arrived, we celebrated not only my personal journey, but also the start of construction for Resilience Village. The groundbreaking ceremony brought together people from all over the region: hopeful seniors, supportive family members, professionals dedicated to the cause. I was invited to give a brief speech, something that would have terrified me a few years earlier. But now, with the confidence that comes from lived experience and the certainty of my own worth, I felt comfortable before the small audience. When I bought this cabin at 65 years old, I thought I was looking for a place to hide from the world, I began. A refuge, where I could finally live in peace without the demands of others. What I didn't realize was that I was, in reality, starting the most important journey of my life. I looked at the faces around me. Marilyn, the girls, Paul, Vanessa, John, Mary, and so many others who had become part of my life in these years. The real gift of my retirement was not the solitude I sought, but the community I found when I finally learned to set healthy boundaries. When I understood that valuing myself was not selfishness, but the necessary foundation for genuine relationships. I pointed to the model of the future Resilience Village, displayed near the ceremony site. This project represents everything I learned on this journey. That independence does not mean isolation, that aging with dignity is a right, not a privilege, and that even in our golden years, we can still create, build, transform, not only our lives, but the world around us. The small audience applauded warmly. I noticed tears in the eyes of many, not of sadness, but of recognition, hope, and possibility. Later that night, while everyone was celebrating with food and music in the large clearing we had prepared, I found a moment of quiet on my cabin porch. The sun was setting slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors I had admired that first day, 3 years ago. Leah, now 15, and showing signs of the strong woman she would become, found me there. "Are you okay, Grandma? You seem thoughtful." "I'm great, dear. Just reflecting on how life takes unexpected turns." She sat down beside me, both of us watching the sunset in a comfortable silence. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Grandma?" she finally asked. "It's not just that you defended your dream, but that you allowed it to grow and change, to include other people." Her words touched me deeply with their wisdom beyond her years. "Perhaps that's what aging well really means," I replied after a moment. "Not just clinging to what we planned, but remaining open to new dreams, new beginnings. Like Resilience Village," she observed. "Exactly. A dream I never imagined having, born from circumstances that initially seemed only painful." We sat there until the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to the improbable journey that had brought me here. It wasn't the quiet retirement I had imagined during those long years of hospital shifts. It was something more complex, more challenging, richer in experience and human connection than I could ever have planned. The cabin I had defended with such determination was no longer just a refuge from the world, but a starting point for a new phase of engagement with it. On my own terms, with clear boundaries and a renewed purpose. As I watched the lights of the celebration in the distance, with the distant sound of laughter and conversation, I felt a deep gratitude for Marilyn and her courage, for the girls and their fresh perspective on the world, for every person who had crossed my path in these last few years, contributing to the rich and complex tapestry my life had become. And I even felt gratitude for the crisis that almost cost me everything. Because without it, perhaps I would never have discovered the strength that had always existed within me, waiting for the right moment to flourish. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left your jaw dropping. Oh, and don't forget to become a member for access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll be waiting for you there. Oh.